Jo Anne Normile is an amazing, Jo Anne Normile is an amazing speaker. She recently wrote a book called Saving Baby that she's going to talk about. She's also the founder of CANTER, and she is the principal of Normile Racehorse Protection Consulting. Jo Anne.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Susan, and thank you to the Triumph Project and to the anonymous donors that have made this second annual American Equine Summit possible. It is my honor to be invited back here today. It's just wonderful to look out and see friends again, my soulmates. But what is really more joyous for me is to look out and see those new faces. Although it is an honor to be here, it is not a pleasure because it means that we weren't successful last year. We did not ban horse slaughter. But from what I've heard earlier today, next year we might be back here in celebration of the horse. I'm going to do something a little different than the previous speakers have today, and I'd like your indulgence. I'm going to be relying heavily on my notes, and the reason being that this is a very intense and thorough topic, and I happen to be a very intense and thorough person, and I don't want to leave here and be saying, oh, I forgot to tell him that. I didn't mention this. Oh, at that point, oh, how did I ever forget that? So I'm not going to let that happen. I'm not going to second guess myself later. So I'm going to be relying on my notes, okay? I want to say that I believe the slaughter of any horse is an abuse of nature. But the slaughter of a thoroughbred racehorse, to my mind, and because I have been so very close to it, is a debauchery that's worthy of ancient Rome. These horses have been, as Dr. Hogan said, they've been named in the hopes that they'll someday be famous. They perform for us. We bet on them. When they are going to their fancy stakes races, long before they have trickled down into cheaper and cheaper racetracks and races, we dress all up to go see them. We have custom-made hats that we spend hundreds of dollars for in order to watch them run. We drink our mint juleps, and we have our parties. And for our enjoyment, we sit there and watch them be whipped and sweat. Then, when they can no longer dazzle us with their grace and their speed, they are sold, often for less than the price of those hats. They become meat on people's plates in Quebec, France, Belgium, Japan, and a number of other countries. And today, as we know, even in countries that don't want to eat them, but unwittingly they are. And most people, even with the current horse meat scandal that's been around the country, most people just fail to make that connection. They continue to think of racing purely as a sport, as if those athletes chose their careers. The Kentucky Derby is going to be a week from today, and it will have as many television viewers as ever, probably in excess of 15 million. They will enjoy the proceedings, blithely unaware that the number of the sinewy, muscled thoroughbreds performing before them that day will very well end up dead on a slaughterhouse floor. The racing industry, by some estimates a $40 billion a year industry, is okay with this. More than okay. They want it this way because they believe that the status quo is a financial necessity to them. That's why even today, They are happy to keep their dirty secret as closely guarded as possible, hiding the truth behind a trophy and a blanket of red roses. I'm missing my little, and a blanket of red roses thrown over a single shimmering thoroughbred at the end of a race. Look, over here, they say, as they show you a picture of the winner's circle. Don't look over there. The obfuscation is very carefully orchestrated. To the public, racing gives good lip service to opposing the slaughter of thoroughbred racehorses. But then they stand there and they shift their weight. They toss those peas around their plate. Oh, I'd love to. But they do anything but take action. Often their tactic is to throw the responsibility on over to someone else. Last year, I wrote to the Jockey Club asking about their position on thoroughbred horse slaughter. And I received in writing from them a reply stating that they opposed it. But, as I relayed to you from this very spot last year, they added that they had not taken any action on the matter because they rely on the American Horse Council and the National Thoroughbred Racing Association to, quote, represent their interests in federal legislation, close quote. So, the Jockey Club passed that hot potato to another racing organization. And when I contacted that organization to get a statement, the National Thoroughbred Racing Association, they gave me a statement of opposition by indicating that they had not taken a stand on the current legislation. Not one of racing's powerful organizations helped promote passage of the American Horse Slaughter Prevention Act, and it died a slow death, as do their horses. Even though various racetracks have adopted no slaughter policies, the track itself doesn't really follow them and enforce it. Kill buyers are as much a fixture at most racetracks around the country as are jockeys, trainers, and grooms. And they are not there on the sly. They are there as part and parcel of the factory personnel that are on the racetrack or visit it. When it comes down to is that the life cycle of a racehorse is simple and irrefutable. Odds are that the horse will die in a slaughterhouse, often before the age of 10, and as we have seen earlier, quite often before the age of 4. Last year, 176,223 horses, 176,223 horses left the United States to be slaughtered. A study published by Colorado State University, co-written by Temple Grandin, estimated that 16% of all horses slaughtered are thoroughbreds, which would mean that in 2012, while billions of dollars were changing hands in the racing industry, 28,196 thoroughbreds went to their deaths, often straight from the track, often after their last races. Their days being treated as rolled dice were over. Many in the racing industry dispute those numbers, saying they're too high. Fine, then what's okay with you? 10%? Or 17,622 thoroughbreds slaughtered in 2012? Are you happy with 5%? Just shy of 9,000 thoroughbreds? The only acceptable response by the industry would be to say, with outrage, that it does not want any of its horses slaughtered. The racing industry says, not to worry, they're on it. In August of last year, right here in New York, and not too far away, at Saratoga Springs, the Jockey Club held its 60th annual Roundtable Conference on matters pertaining to racing. It was the 5th year in a row that the Jockey Club convened the Thoroughbred Safety Committee. As stated right on the Jockey Club's website, that committee's purpose is to, quote, review every facet of equine health and recommend actions the industry could take to improve the health and safety of the horse. Last year, that committee's role was particularly highlighted. The vice chairman of the Jockey Club and the actual chairman of the safety committee, Stuart S. Janney III, reminded everyone present that the safety committee has 2 priorities, and I quote, to focus on improving the welfare of the horse and to center on actions and changes that would enhance the integrity, acceptability, and popularity of racing. I wish I had been there. I could have told them how to address both of those priorities. Stop slaughtering your horses. Those are the 2 reasons that committee was formed. But they just can't seem to wrap their heads around that. Never at any of the annual, is that me? Any of the annual Jockey Club Roundtable conferences since the creation of that safety committee have the words horse slaughter ever even been mentioned. You know, our hostess, Susan Wagner, asked me to speak today to the issue of what the racing industry can do to make sure thoroughbreds don't go from the track to slaughter. Okay, so I'm going to address that directly right now. Quit ignoring the elephant in the room. Quit your verbal grandstanding with objections to slaughter. Quit forming committees and holding conferences put together specifically to make it look like the racing industry cares about its horses' welfare. Thoroughbreds do hold the record for the breed with the 2nd highest number of horses sent to slaughter, second only to the American Quarter Horse, whose breed has at least been transparent in making it no secret of its pro-slaughter stance. It's not just the welfare of the thoroughbreds that's at stake, it's the welfare of those people who eat them. Plenty of horses are laced with bute and other drugs that make it into the human food supply, as Dr. Marini so clearly just pointed out for everyone. There was a horse named Silky Shark, and he earned over $100,000 in his racing career. And you can be sure that he was given plenty of drugs to prop him up and keep him running. But during the month he was slaughtered, and he was slaughtered after 2 surgeries and lots of bute failed to make him profitable at the track anymore, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency reported that no horse meat was found to have bute in it, nor were there any horse meat recalls in the following months. However, somebody or some people ate Silky Shark. To turn that modus operandi around, it's going to take the racing industry more than quitting their passive, or should I say their passive-aggressive tactics. They're going to have to actually do something, institute changes. Now, whatever can and should the racing industry do to follow its own stated goals of protecting the welfare of the horse and enhancing the integrity, the acceptability, and the popularity of racing? Well, let's lay it out for them and see if they're willing to make a paradigm shift, or if we're going to be back here in another year still talking about the same thing. It begins with a major industry-wide PR campaign standing behind the new federal legislation, the SAFE Act, the acronym for the Safeguard American Food Export Act, introduced last month. If the $40 billion racing industry supported this bipartisan bill, helping it pass, that would prevent the reintroduction of horse slaughter operations in the United States, end the current export of our horses across the borders, and protect the public from eating toxic horse meat. All they need to do to make this bill pass, to help us have it pass, to ensure that it would pass, is to tell their lobbyists that the racing industry wants to end the slaughter of their horses. Imagine how quickly that bill would be signed into law if the considerable might of the national lobbyists representing the four most powerful organizations in racing, the Jockey Club, the National Thoroughbred Racing Association, the National Thoroughbred Owners and Breeders Association, and the National Horsemen's Benevolent and Protective Association, promoted the passage of this legislation to protect their most valuable assets, their horses. But is this too much to ask of them? Is this too fragmented of an industry to promote on a national level the end of the slaughter of their horses through federal legislation? If that is the case, and I do think it is, then racing in the great state of New York can take that action on its own. As you well know from earlier, Senator Marchione and Assemblyman Tedesco from the Empire State have introduced dual bills in the New York Senate and the New York Assembly that would prohibit horse slaughter for human consumption and prevent horses from being transported across state lines for slaughter. New York racing can choose to throw its full weight behind both of these bills. Sadly, though, the only New York racing organization voicing support for this life-saving legislation for New York's racehorses was the New York Thoroughbred Breeders Incorporated. Just like their national counterparts, the New York racing organizations like to say they are opposed to the slaughter of their horses, but they also like to do nothing. I did speak a few days ago with Dave Brown. He is president of the Finger Lakes Horsemen's Benevolent and Protective Association. And he assured me that this matter will be on his organization's agenda for their May 20th board meeting. He says he strongly believes that the racing horsemen and trainers and owners at his Finger Lakes chapter will vote to actively participate in promoting this legislation. Now, I will be returning to Michigan, but for those of you remaining in New York, please, I want you to put this on your calendars to ask them, how is that going after May 20th? Last year, the horrendous death rate of horses on the tracks in New York went viral. From newspapers and racing magazines to blogs and other social media. Fully 21 horses died or had to be euthanized at Aqueduct Racetrack alone in just 3.5 months. At the bequest of New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo, a special task force on racehorse health and safety was formed. They came up with some recommendations, but strangely, nothing at all about enacting legislation that currently claims the life of most racehorses, horse slaughter. Their focus was about the bad press over 21 horses. Let's suppose the anti-slaughter legislation does get passed, even without racing's endorsement. Then what? What does the racing industry do with all these horses that can no longer run or run fast enough? What can the racing industry do with all its used up horses, even before any bill is signed into law, in order to keep them out of the slaughter pipeline? How do they do that? Well, identification of racing's assets, their racehorses. Now let's call this step 2, okay, and how to retire their racehorses humanely. Step 1 being if the industry would support the bills to ban horse slaughter. And let's talk about New York specifically, because this is a premier racing state, and you can be an example for the rest of the country to follow. So Step 2 is identify your assets. Identify your horses. Require that any racehorse foaled in New York or that is a part of the New York breeding program, meaning brood mares and stallions, be microchipped. Furthermore, require that any horse that enters the grounds of a racetrack in New York, no matter what state it was shipped in from, must be microchipped within 48 hours. Poof! The problem with horses leaving the track unauthorized and unknown, often for slaughter, would get much, much smaller, just with that single provision, which is already practiced by so many other countries throughout Europe and Asia. It can be done, and I can prove it to you by asking you to consider for a moment an asset that everyone in the racing industry already values: toilet paper. When you go to the grocery store and you pick up your toilet paper, they know when you walk out of the store exactly which 4 or 6 roll package you've bought. In fact, you can't walk out of that store without them knowing that you and that toilet paper are connected. They know exactly how much that toilet paper is even worth to you, and perhaps even how often you buy it. Why? Because that toilet paper has a barcode. That barcode tells which store the toilet paper was bought from, along with its price, the date, the exact time that that valued asset left that particular store. If you are like most of us and you used a customer reward card or a credit card or you paid by check, that store even knows the name of the person who is wiping their behind. All of that information is gleaned from the scan of a barcode, which takes a millisecond. Now, let's look at the current system for how the racing industry keeps track of its assets. To the uninitiated, it does put on a pretty good show. In thoroughbred racing, where the vast majority of horses actively racing and training are kept in the barns and shed rows right at the racetrack on the backstretch, it looks visibly secure. Access is strictly limited, and whether driving or walking in, you have to have a track license, which is very similar to a driver's license, and it has to be displayed, and you have to be fingerprinted in order to get it. That track license, by the way, it has a barcode. Moreover, there is a security building or a guard station that someone on duty is on duty there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week during that track's racing season. Beyond that, the racing regulations in virtually every state require the recording and physical identification of every single horse that enters the highly secured grounds. At many tracks, we're talking easily between 1,000 and 1,200 horses, if not more. The very same recording and identification is required by the security guards of every horse that leaves the grounds. All of these safeguards look quite formidable in the aggregate, but looks are deceiving. The backstretch of a racetrack is like a small town. Twice each day, if not 4 times, the same trainers, assistant trainers, grooms, exercise riders, jockeys agents, farriers, veterinarians, they're going to pass that security checkpoint. At my old track near Detroit, this spot was called the Security Shack. Shack is apt, and here's why. The guards and all of these people become very familiar with each other. Pretty much a wave of the hand is all you need to enter this restricted area. The track licenses, the spot searches, they're pretty much a lot on paper and not the reality of track life. Okay, you might say, but that's going to happen anywhere where there's guards and they recognize the people that come in and out. But the identifying of the horses that enter and leave the backstretch, the identifying of racing's assets, that's just as lax. And those guards do not know one horse from another. Sometimes, on the way out of the backstretch, as the driver idles by, he may give a thumbs down sign to the security guard, meaning that the trailer is empty. Is it? Who knows? It's the Wild West back there. Horses enter and leave the track grounds with less security than a roll of toilet paper leaves the supermarket. It's not just those with track licenses drive right by the security guards. I'm thinking here of a woman named Kelsey Lefevre, who used to go hunting for racing's discards at 3 tracks in Pennsylvania and West Virginia, Penn National, Charlestown, and Mountaineer Park. A frequent visitor to those tracks, she represented herself as a rescue. Although she did not hold a track license, she was always waved through, often leaving the grounds with horses on her trailer. Finally caught at her game, she admitted to selling 120 racehorses for slaughter and pocketing that money. Her punishment? She was given probation. She might not have tried to return to those tracks, but who knows what new hunting grounds she may have cultivated. Even if racehorses did follow their own rules and check which horses are coming and going and by whom, who's bringing them in and who's bringing them out, it would be very cumbersome. Why? Well, it goes back to our toilet paper comparison. The toilet paper can be scanned because of its barcode. A trailer full of horses, on the other hand, would require that security guard have access to each horse in order to flip its upper lip so that it could view and record the tattoo number. That's the method used in racing to identify horses in those theoretical instances where they might have to be identified with certainty. Is it any wonder that the security guard doesn't climb aboard those loaded horse trailers and identify each and every horse coming and going? Even if he meant to, he couldn't. The lighting is not good. The horses are difficult to reach without being offloaded right there and then. The tattoos become distorted over time. They fade. It's like reading the tattoos on a wizened sailor. That's a sample of a tattoo, and it's really spread around. I mean, that horse was very cooperative, but it's my horse. My horses are all very cooperative. What is so dangerous is that the way to identify, what is so outrageous is that the way to identify thoroughbreds could be changed so very easily if the horses were just microchipped. The location of the microchip would just be scanned on each one of the horses, and you'd have swift, accurate identification and as many details about that horse that you would care to keep on record. How about the medications, the dates of treatment, surgeries? Microchips are tiny, the size of a pencil lead, and they're very easy to implant. The scanners used to read them only cost $300 to $500. If that still sounds like an ordeal to get that up and running and have to do that with every single horse, I want you to know that microchipping of thoroughbred racehorses is required in every country in Europe, Japan, Dubai, Australia, and South Africa. Which leads me back to this question. Why do we here in the United States value our toilet paper more than our racehorses? Why does the state of New York value its toilet paper more than its racehorses? Lead the way, New York. Did you know that a horse in this country is not even required to be tattooed? This is a racehorse. They're not even required to be tattooed until just before they race. That means from the time of the full registration until the horse's first race at age 2, 3, or 4, there is absolutely no truly secure way to immediately identify, for instance, one solid bay from another, from another, from another. If New York doesn't want to microchip, it can take the even easier route of iris scanning. Nothing needs to be implanted in any horse. The iris of its eye, it's actually more unique than our own fingerprints. The iris is scanned, just as the microchip would be. And then the screen will show all the identifying information about a particular horse anyone would want to have on there. Super simple. A James Bond solution without so much as a car chase. But New York can do more, much more, to stop the slaughter and to support the Federal SAFE Act and to get its own anti-slaughter legislation signed into law and require the microchipping or iris scanning of its horses that run at its racetrack so they know its whereabouts. Step 3 would be to adopt a uniform statewide zero-tolerance policy for slaughter for any race horse in New York and put teeth in that policy, such that if a horse is found in a kill buyer's feedlot, is sold for even a low amount of money, that a prudent person would know that the horse is at risk of going to slaughter. If the horse is found en route to slaughter, at a slaughterhouse, or already slaughtered, its trainer and owner of record at the time the horse left the track will be banned permanently from all tracks within the state. If the racing industry is going to brag about its zero tolerance for slaughter requirements, then it needs to become active in promoting and enforcing it. Ignorance of the policy is not an excuse. New York's racing associations and individual racetracks should ensure that the notice of the zero tolerance for slaughter policy is everywhere. On the application for a track license that everyone must renew every year. On the racetrack's application for stalls. In the condition books that the track publishes. And while we're at it, why don't we put that right in the public racing programs? Let racing's fans see that you protect your horses. The more people that are out there that spot these horses in the slaughter pipeline, they can contact you. They can contact the racetracks for help. And the safer your horses will be. On to step 4. Step 4 is that each racetrack should be required to provide a sufficient number of stalls for trainers and owners to turn in horses no longer able to race for any reason whatsoever. The retirement of racing's horses must begin right at the track itself. That CANTER was the first rescue to intake horses directly from their stalls on the backstretch right into CANTER is the reason why it was so successful. But it's time for racing to stop dumping its used up assets on the rescues. Let the owners and trainers take their racehorses they no longer want and bring them to the safe stalls. The trainer or owner can then bring in another horse to fill their own stall without putting a horse at risk when it can no longer race. The industry has to be the one to provide this first haven for their horse's initial intake and account for them right there before they leave the track and have a chance to get into the slaughter pipeline. Step 5, a retirement oversight authority needs to be created. Perhaps the Office of Humane Equine Affairs, as was suggested just last August by Susan Wagner, when she was a panelist at the annual Saratoga Racing and Gaming Institute conference, something that racing would be proud to be a part of. This agency would be responsible for the procedures to protect retired racehorses going forward once their careers in racing were over. The first steps would be to have the horses evaluated by veterinarians, ideally with no connection to the track or to the industry in general, and they would evaluate their physical and mental condition for transitioning to a non-race discipline. A lot of people on the backstretch would be very glad about this. When I was with CANTER, there were many very very callous trainers and others on the track grounds who made sport of sending their horses to their deaths and even laughed at me. But there were many others who were glad, who were relieved to see us take their horses and transition them into new, safe lives. Of course, there are always some horses that come off their last race in such bad shape that they cannot go on to new careers or even a new home as a lawn ornament. In those cases, it would be up to the Office of Humane Equine Affairs to make sure they are euthanized right on the track grounds to avoid needless transport and any additional suffering. The sheer number of horses who can no longer make it around the track each year will make triage of such horses mandatory for the program to safeguard these horses as best as possible. A lot of people don't like the idea of euthanasia, but it is a reality. In many cases, it is the only way to retire a racehorse humanely. It is a far, far better end, a peaceful end, than what that horse would go through if it were to experience a trip to the slaughterhouse. The Office of Humane Equine Affairs would be responsible for the protection, the welfare, and the retirement of New York's racing horses. Working in tandem with that track's racing secretary, the track veterinarians, and the racing stewards, that office would identify horses at special risk by monitoring those horses that make a sudden and a significant drop in the class of race, or those horses that are finishing their races poorly, horses that are entered to race far too frequently, horses that were scratched from a race by a veterinarian, and horses that are on the vet list. Horses deemed suitable for second careers and other disciplines would be transitioned to horse rescues. And maybe now we would call those places havens. They have passed muster with the Office of Humane Equine Affairs. Since these retirement facilities, rescues, and sanctuaries already exist, the racing industry does not need to buy farms for their adoptable horses. It would fall to racing, though, to provide these horse havens with the funds when they intake a horse. That would facilitate quick removal from the track of the sound horses so they can begin their new lives, and it would free up space in the safe stall barn. You know, the ironic thing here is that New York racing already knows what to do. This state already has the most comprehensive plan for taking care of your retiring racehorses of any state I am aware of. I have reviewed the recommendations of the New York State Task Force on Retired Racehorses, which is 243 pages long. The members of this task force are varied and impressive. What they compiled is nothing short of a work of art. The task force acknowledges what those in racehorse rescue have been insisting upon all along, that the racing industry and its participants, not the public or the taxpayers, must take primary responsibility for the aftercare of the retired racehorses and must address the fiscal challenges of ensuring quality aftercare. The sad and all too predictable truth is that this very good idea and all of these wonderful plans in this report, prepared 2 years ago now, remain to be implemented. How many horses have gone to slaughter since then? It's not a matter of too little money to take the necessary steps, and I want to make that very clear. There is enough money wagered on the horses to set aside a percentage for the horses who earned it. How much money are we talking about? Well, in New York, the money bet on thoroughbred racehorses, that's the wagering handle, is overseen by the New York State Racing and Wagering Board. I spoke to Lee Park, Director of Communications for the board, and one of the most patient people on earth, as we discussed all the different income sources that New York's horses create through the public betting on them. The last annual figure New York's thoroughbred races brought into this great state from betting on the horses through the racetracks and bets made at off-track betting parlors. And note now, this does not include Racino money or lottery money. This amount is the bets placed on the horses. $1,582,232,489 in 1 year. That's billion with a B. I can think of another word that begins with a B for anyone who says New York racing cannot provide for every single thoroughbred horse bred here or bred elsewhere and racing here. Can you? Currently, not only in New York, but in every racing state, no funds from the money wagered on these poor horses are earmarked for the horses themselves. The horses are the ones earning the money for everyone else, and they often die, and not just during races, but did you know that more horses die during training than racing? Or they're slaughtered because they simply are no longer fast enough. I submit to you that New York State be the first out of the starting gate and begin changing that statistic by digging into their deep coffers. It can happen, and it must happen if racing is to survive. More than 80% of the United States population opposes the slaughter of horses. They are not going to keep ignoring the fact that this is an industry that kills its athletes. The industry can't afford to do that. Not since the advent of social media, which has become the racehorse's best friend. The following was posted on Facebook. I was checking my news feed this week, and I found this, and it was shared repeatedly on Facebook. And this was a picture taken right here in the United States when we were supposedly doing this humanely. When horse slaughter was legal, and there was a vet on the premises to make sure no horse suffered. And I want to read to you the caption on Facebook that went with this picture as it traveled through the social media. Quote, "Banged up and exhausted, shipped from Ohio to Texas in her racing plates, paralyzed with fear, possibly foundered," you look at her stance, "waiting to die. Note the left rear plate is half off. Most horses get battered to some degree during long-haul transport. If they're not oozing pus and can walk into the box, they're slaughtered. If they can't walk into the box, they are slaughtered right there on the filthy floor. The bright new blood on this mare's head and the left front indicate injuries suffered during offload or at the end of her journey. Skinny, elderly, poverty-stricken owner because it was his only humane choice? No, I think not. Pro-slaughter profiteers lie." Close quote. The call to keep horses from slaughter is not only for those still racing, it's the same for the stallions and the broodmares no longer useful and routinely sold for slaughter. The powerful organizations that run the industry need to start flexing their muscles, doling out severe consequences for anyone in the breeding industry killing their horses for a little money. These are horses that have given twice, once at the racetrack, only to survive, to be bred to produce more racehorses to make you money before a final trip to the slaughterhouse. During that very same time, I was checking my news feed before coming here, and I found that previous picture of the thoroughbred mare with that entire statement. I found this photo too. I mean, by those legs, I would say that's a thoroughbred of that foal. This mare and her foal are walking down an aisle after a kill auction. Their slaughter tags are clear on their hips. The mare was in foal. Thank you.